After going days without electricity, heat, food, or water, Ukrainians trapped by constant shelling in the city of Mariupol were targets today of one of the worst attacks yet. According to Ukrainian officials, Russian airstrikes destroyed a maternity and children's hospital full of some of the most defenseless citizens in this war. For the lucky who have been able to flee, the journey has been a traumatic one, with more than 1 million children managing to cross at various borders, most having to leave behind fathers and older brothers who are not allowed to leave. And the footage has been heart-wrenching. One scene that got a lot of attention on social media this week was this video of a young boy sobbing as he crossed into Poland. At first, many believed he was all alone. Polish media later reported his mother was ahead, but still, his pain is visceral, prompting some to ask, how does one see this, then turn around and complain about gas prices? This is heartbreaking. And it is. But as many have also correctly pointed out, not all young refugees have been received with such open arms, and many are still suffering in relative silence, like those in Afghanistan, trying to survive a hunger crisis after 20 years of war and the resurgence of the Taliban. It's a situation so dire that a UNICEF official recently warned, without urgent, concerted action, many of the country's children will not live to see spring. Then there are the kids fleeing gang warfare in Central America and Mexico, sometimes with family and sometimes alone, unable to apply for asylum in the U.S. as Biden continues a Trump-era policy. I'm joined by Jacqueline Bhabha, a longtime human rights lawyer who is director of research at the FXB Center for Health and Human Rights, and Sue Roses, an immigration attorney who is a director of legal programs with the Rian Center in Boston. Welcome to both of you. Jacqueline, I want to start with you first. If you could just let me know what your take is on why some of these crises get our attention for a period of time and why others we either get numb to or just don't pay enough attention to.
So I think it depends who the we you're talking about is, Sue, because we, the consumer of news, of television, of radio, of newspaper reports, I think are very often taken by these stories for quite long periods of time. So if the we is the public, I think that exposure to the heart-wrenching suffering of innocent civilians really touches us. And I don't think people are fatigued that quickly. I think, by contrast, if we are the journalists or the newspaper editors, then I think there are different demands on their attention. So I was talking recently to some Ukrainian colleagues who were saying, we realize that the window of opportunity with global media is limited. And so we want to get this message out urgently because we know that things will shift. And indeed, I was also talking to an Afghan friend who said exactly the same. All the attention is now on Ukraine, and understandably so. But in Afghanistan, the situation has gone from bad to worse. So I think it's really a question of the channels of communication that we are able to encounter. It's not so much that as consumers we shut off, because I think people do have ability for really sustained solidarity if the states that they're in continue to support that solidarity.
Yeah, a number of folks that I spoke to remember the child being put over the fence in Afghanistan. We have an image of that, the baby that was lifted over the barbed wire during the attempted evacuation from Afghanistan. She was returned with her parents on a flight out of Kabul, and they now live in Arizona, so a happy ending there. But Sue, the stories of children fleeing and being refugees, especially here in the United States, is not one that often has a happy ending, especially for those who are fleeing from Central America and Mexico.
Right, that's absolutely true. Frequently, Central American asylees and refugees who are fleeing gang violence in their own countries and other forms of repression are not received very well by the U.S. First, if they're caught at the border, they're often placed in detention facilities. As we know, under the Trump administration, they were often separated from family members, and then they were transferred to Red Cross shelters. So that's how the process begins, right? And hopefully they have contact for some family in the United States. But once they get here, they're thrown into a legal system that is not designed to protect children, that does not provide for legal representation for children. So they're very much dependent upon organizations like Kids in Need of Defense. That's a national organization that helps, try to find pro bono representation for children who are, in our case, at RIAN, we represent people from over 120 different countries around the world, but we do have many Haitian and Central American immigrants seeking to remain in the US. So we often have to take some of these special immigrant juvenile cases, and they take a very long time. It's a long process. It's many years. Kids don't have work permits. They can't get driver's licenses for many, many years if they're coming from Central America. So it's a very disparate treatment, unfortunately.
Jacqueline, one of the things that has always shocked me about how some people react to welcoming refugees, and just for the sake of argument, let's just pretend, I know we don't live in that world, but let's just say that there are refugees coming into a community. To me, the people that have been able to have the fortitude and the strength and the ability to get their family to safety, to really go through the hardships and the trauma that almost every refugee goes through to get somewhere safe, are exactly the type of people that I would want to welcome into my community and into this country. What has to happen for the general public to sort of get that message and to see folks fleeing hardship and refugees entering our communities for the value that they bring to this country?
I think that what has to happen, to answer your really good question, is that the generosity and the solidarity of community members like you and me has to be matched with support from government and state institutions. So I think that we very often see an outpouring of generosity. And we're seeing it now in Europe with Ukrainians, but we saw it here with Afghans, and we saw it in Mexico with some of the caravans and so on. And you see it again and again. I think that instinct and that human solidarity, that identification with the suffering of another, particularly, as you say, people who are admirable, who have so much to offer, often come with skills and with enthusiasm. But even those who don't, frankly, deserve our generosity as well. I think that the trouble is that very often that generosity of spirit of the public is not matched by a state that is ready and prepared, that anticipates the need. And instead, people feel that they're abandoned with their generosity and nobody else is helping. Nobody is participating. Nobody is making sure that schools are able to accept extra children or that healthcare facilities are equipped. And I think that's the real difficulty we face. And so if I could just spend 1 second talking about Ukraine, I think the only really good piece of news in this heart-wrenching tragedy is that for the first time ever, the European Union has opened its doors and said, you guys can come and you can stay safely for a year, at least, till the 4th of March, 2023. If you were in Ukraine on the 24th of February and you left after the 24th of February and you're still leaving now, you are welcome and you can choose where you're going to go. Now, what a difference that makes, not only to the refugees who are fleeing, but also to the communities, because the communities that are hosting them know that these people will be able to work. They'll be able to look after themselves. They may need your help today or tomorrow, but in a month or two, they'll be up and running. Now, that is what makes it possible. So I think in the US too, when we're talking about Central Americans coming, if they come and they have a legal authority to come, and they have the ability to work and support their families, that's what they want, then communities into which they settle will be inclined to accept them. But I think where people feel that they're going to have to carry the brunt of the responsibility for months on end, that their own quality of life is going to be threatened, then you can't be surprised that eventually people get weary.
Sue, Jacqueline makes a good point. I said during the one of the waves of the unaccompanied minors coming over, had they been puppies coming over, people would have been lining up to adopt them and bring them home and paying any money they needed to fly them across the country. But because they were children, and many of them brown and black, it didn't have the same impact as if they had been pugs coming over. What can we do to get our government to lead the way on this? What can we get to have the government do what we would do as individuals and then help us as a community to provide refuge for these refugees that deserve it? And I mean deserve it, they all deserve it is what I mean.
Right. No, and I, to your point, before I answer that specific question, to your point, I mean, I was reading an article about a mother who put her child on a train to Slovakia, right? And that child was received as a hero, an 11-year-old boy. And when Central American parents send their kids to the border, and their kids are often riding on top of a train known as the Beast, which is death-defying, literally, they're not received the same way. We put them in cages, we separate them from their families. But to your question, I mean, I think the most important thing really is to get involved politically, to be communicative with your representatives, with your senators, to get involved with human rights organizations. There are all sorts of different, human rights organizations that you should be in touch with. But I think really the most important thing is the political lobbying with your representatives. And, we try to, at the Re-End Immigrant Center, sometimes we will reach out to congressional aides for help, and you have to use those humanitarian stories. You have to, sometimes have clients who are willing to put their own personal trauma on display, if you will, in the media, but with the goal of, showing that, look, this is, black or brown or white, like these people are suffering, this is trauma, and this is an opportunity to really focus on empathy for all of these human beings. And they want to contribute to our society, and we need to be able to make that happen and create legal paths for them to do that.
Jacqueline, we just have a couple of seconds left, but I imagine that you would agree that if a lot of the time, if we can focus the conversation and center the conversation on the children that are suffering, it might open up the door for others to see the parents and the grandparents that go along with them.
I completely agree with you. I think that we all know what it's like to have a child who you can't comfort, or a child who's wet, or who's hungry, or who's in distress. And everybody has felt that pang. And so while one doesn't want to exploit images of suffering in a kind of degrading way, and one doesn't want to permanently cast some groups as being always victims. At the same time, I think mobilizing solidarity is really important, and it's an enormous contribution that you guys can make.
Well, Jacqueline Bhabha, Sue Roses, I appreciate both of you for your work, and thank you for your time today. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much.